Good morning, everyone. We'll just give this a few minutes as we still have some participants joining our webinar today. Good morning. We'll just give it one more minute for people to join the webinar, and then we'll get started. Okay, it looks like things are starting to slow down with people entering the webinar. Kaylin, I'll just ask you to keep an eye on the lobby just in case anyone else joins and make sure they can get into the meeting. That would be fabulous. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CCUS webinar series. This is the first webinar in our series, the CCUS Value Chain. What is CCUS? Thanks for joining us today. My name is Tamara Gale, and I am the Senior Marketing and Communications Manager at Carbon Management Canada. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. We are situated on land northwest of where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, a site traditionally known as Mohkinstsis to the Blackfoot, Winchespaw to the Stoney Nakoda, and Gutitsi to the Tsuut'ina. Today on this land and in this place, we strive to learn and grow together in a good way. We'll get started this morning just with a quick review of our agenda. We'll introduce our speakers to you today, and we're pleased to have three knowledgeable experts in CCUS join us today. And following that, we'll do a pre-webinar survey just with some quick questions. They'll be super easy, I promise, for our participants. We'll hear from each of our speakers as they give their presentations, and we'll provide you with a chance to ask your questions. And before closing the webinar, we'll just close off with a final survey. If you have any questions for our speakers today, please enter them into the Q&A or the chat. My colleague Kaylin will be monitoring those two channels for us to make sure we get to your questions today. So thanks again to those who are still just coming in. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to introduce you today to our speakers. Our first speaker is Michelle Unsworth, and she is a Senior Project Manager at Carbon Management Canada, responsible for leading the Carbon Next program, among many others in her portfolio. Her master's in environmental geology complements her industry experience in oil and gas, as well as environmental monitoring and assessment. Michelle's background also includes implementation of strategic initiatives, having dedicated 2.5 years to the National Research Council's IRAP program, where she was a strategic advisor responsible for driving innovation, program delivery, and optimization. Michelle strives to play a key role in assisting CMC and our partners in deploying groundbreaking carbon management solutions. Our second speaker today is Hamid Bimanesh, and Hamid is the CCS reservoir modeler at Carbon Management Canada. With over 7 years of industry experience in the North American production and oil field service sectors, his primary responsibility is to provide technical expertise to full chain CCUS projects. Hamid's experience has allowed him to develop into a quickly adaptable petroleum engineer. Hamid is currently involved with supporting and developing CMC's CCUS company portfolio, as well as creating and updating models for the purpose of safe injection and CO2 storage. Hamid is also responsible for representing the subsurface and integration with multidisciplinary teams. Welcome to Michelle and Hamid. And lastly, I'd like to introduce you to Jason. Jason Cardiff began his career as a plumber and HVAC mechanic in Calgary, Alberta, where he developed a keen interest in clean technology, particularly in reducing carbon emissions from heating appliances. After more than a decade of research and tinkering, Jason co-founded CleanO2 in 2017. The company offers a device that captures CO2 from commercial customers and converts it into valuable products such as soap, shampoo, and fertilizer. CleanO2 provides businesses with a fast return on investment while helping them reduce greenhouse gas emissions by approximately 20%. So we're pleased to have Michelle, Hamid, and Jason join us today, and they have prepared some presentations for you. So next, I will ask Kaylin to please share our webinar survey, and we'll ask each of our participants today to please put in your answers to the survey. We have a few quick questions, and it shouldn't take you too long to answer. So the first one, how familiar are you with the CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage industry? And we have a scale rated there for you. Okay, and we'll move on to the next question. How interested are you in learning about the CCUS sector? Not at all interested, slightly interested, neutral, somewhat interested, or very interested? And I'll give you a moment to answer this question as well. Okay, hopefully everyone has had a chance to answer this question. And moving on to the next. Which of the following best describes your current involvement with the energy or CCUS sectors? Select all that apply. If you work in the energy sector, oil and gas, CCUS, hydrogen, any other areas of the energy sector. If you're a student or research in energy-related fields. If you live in Canada and would like to learn more about CCUS, or if you live outside of Canada and would like to learn more about CCUS, feel free to select all that apply to you, and then please submit your responses. The submit button at the bottom there. We'll just give it another moment for everyone to get through their questions there. Thanks so much for participating in the survey. It helps us just to gather the information we need to prepare events for you that will provide you with the information you need to learn more about CCUS in Alberta. Okay, thanks, Kaylin. I think hopefully we've captured everyone's answers there. And I'd like to ask Michelle to start sharing her screen and begin her presentation.
Okay, is that up?
Yes, looks good.
Can you see that? Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy to have you join us today. I find clean energy transition to be a very interesting topic. And of course, today we are discussing one critical aspect of that, which is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So let's begin. CCUS is recognized as a major pathway by international science-based organizations that you see here to reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted globally. And currently we are emitting just over 35 billion tons of GHG a year. You can read the statements yourselves, but essentially they are saying that CCUS has a niche, particularly in heavy industry, where switching from fossil fuel to electricity or to alternative fuels like hydrogen may not be feasible. This is also called hard to abate emissions. So CCUS is there as a solution. CCUS can enable the achievement of GHG reduction targets by 2030 and the net zero targets by 2050. And the term net zero refers to balancing the amount of emissions put into the atmosphere with the amount taken out. Moment here, let's just get this the way I want it. Okay, can you still see that? Yep, okay.
Yes, yeah,
Let's just
looks
forge
good.
on here. The International Energy Agency, they came out with a pivotal document, often cited. It's the Net Zero Roadmap. That was in 2021. They've recently updated it mid-2023. And many of the points, here is one of the points they make, that there are approximately 35 commercial CCUS facilities in operation. That we can see in the aqua line here. And that has the collective capacity to capture almost 45 million tons of CO2 each year. So over 45 countries have planned an expansion or development of CCUS facilities up to the level of 400 million tons of CO2. However, the IEA says that to achieve net zero, we'll need 3 times that amount. So 1.2 gigaton of CO2. You can see the gap here between what has been announced and planned and what is needed to achieve net zero. So clearly we need to ramp up the CCUS activities and projects coming in the future. The organization does recognize a surge of announced projects for CCUS, but the majority, and we can see that level here, the 400 million tons, but the majority have yet to receive, to reach final investment decision. And keep in mind, these are hundreds of millions of dollar projects, if not multi-billion dollar projects. So it underscores the need for further policy support and government investment. Okay. There we go. So the CCUS, the drivers to growth in CCUS are many. The Canadian contribution of CCUS projects, technology, expertise that comes with that is acknowledged to be a crucial aspect of global emission reductions goals. So a few points here. It will take joint industry and government cooperation and cost sharing in order to make this happen. There needs to be consistent policy to enable decision-making and investment and planning for these major projects. The public support and understanding of the benefits that CCUS brings beyond the contribution to global emissions reduction, but there are jobs, rural developments, investment, being a technology leader and the ability to export that technology, all very important. And the last point is that Canada is already really well positioned for leadership in this area, and we need the people, maybe some of you, to carry this forward, which is why hopefully you are here. So let's look at some of this data. Canada, you can see the map on the left. Canada is the dark maroon color. We have one of the highest per capita GHG emissions in the world. So in 2022, each Canadian emitted approximately 20 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per person. Notice Australia also with a also is a high per capita emitter. But keep in mind that the populations of our country, 40 million people, is relatively low when compared to G7 countries. And I think we rank about 40 in the list of countries by population. So on a per capita basis, it does look like we are very high emitters indeed. But moving over to the right, our industry in both manufacturing and resource extraction does put us in the top 10 of absolute GHG emitters. So you can see right here is Canada. And it's also interesting to note that the top 10 emitters account for 2/3 of the emissions. So in other words, there are large inequities in per capita emissions across the world. And in fact, that was a major topic and a major debate at the last two Conference of the Parties, the COP29 that just happened. So I feel the need to go into coal a little bit here because of its incredible impact on GHG emissions globally. So we'll just spend a little bit of time on coal. Asia Pacific, in terms of global coal consumption, is on the rise, whereas everybody else is phasing out. So the world's three largest coal producers, China, India, Indonesia, will have all hit production records in the last few years. Whereas in Alberta, we have recently phased out coal entirely. So 0% of our electricity generation is from the burning of coal. This pie chart or circle chart on the right shows that globally, coal still accounts for 35% of the power generation mix, so very high. For example, in 2022, coal accounted for 20% of US electricity generation. However, many of these plants in North America and in Europe are at end of life. They're around 40 years old and will be decommissioned with no new capacity in that area. There is, however, new coal-fueled electricity generation coming online in other areas of the world. For example, in fact, there are 9,000 coal-fired power plants. So there is a stark contrast between China and the rest of the world. More than 4 times the number of coal-fired power plants in China as in the next largest burner of coal, which is India. So yeah, so this is at an 8-year high, it says, compared to the rest of the world. So there is new coal capacity coming online. This is an issue. It is greenhouse gas intensive. It not only releases carbon dioxide, but also other greenhouse gas emissions like sulfur and nitrogen oxides, as well as ash that contains impurities which may have heavy metals, mercury in it. And also the particulates in ash are known as soot, which affects air quality. So let's move on from coal. And we'll change tack here from global emissions to national level emissions. But first of all, well, okay, so let's start with the pie chart here. This is the breakdown, Canada's breakdown of our particular emissions profile. This can change depending on where you are. But the CO2 here is 78% of the mix. The next largest is methane at 17%. And then the rest of the greenhouse gases account for about 6% of emissions. So what about the metrics, the units of carbon emission? What do they mean? So we'll start with global warming potential. Each greenhouse gas has its own GWP. CO2 is set to 1, and everything else is measured relative to CO2. So methane has a global warming potential of 28, meaning that methane is 28 times more potent than CO2 in terms of trapping heat in the atmosphere over a period of 100 years. So the third most abundant GHG is nitrous oxide, which has a GWP of 265 times the polluting capacity of CO2. So the CO2 equivalent calculation, which is typically what you would see in the statistics, is a CO2e. It's weighted not only for the volume of each gas, but also the global warming potential of each gas. So this enables comparison and evaluation of greenhouse gas emissions because the mix is different depending on the location. So this, let's go back. So the total number in 2022 of Canada's GHG emissions was 708 million tons of CO2 equivalent. That total is the same on this pie chart, except it is broken down by sector. So the oil and gas sector accounts for the largest, 31% of Canada's emissions. Next is transport, and then there's buildings, commercial and residential, and electricity. So this electricity at 6.7 is a little bit misleading because all of these industries consume power and electricity. So we'll get into that in a slide or two. Let's look at the Energy Fact Book. This is put out, I believe, yearly from Natural Resources Canada. It's an excellent publication, and it's based on statistics, mainly Statistics Canada derived. This idea of the correlation between energy production and consumption with GHG emissions is important to look at. So globally, 78% of GHG emissions are from production and consumption of energy. In Canada, it's a little bit higher at 82%. And here's the various areas: gasoline, electricity generation powered by fossil fuel, oil and gas production, heating and cooling of buildings that we're sitting in right now. This is all included in this type of stat. So the International Energy Agency, their projections for net zero in 2050, they have that electricity will provide greater than half of total energy consumption instead of fossil fuel. So there's a lot of fossil fuel in these numbers, but the switch is more to electrification. So traditionally, there has been a direct positive relationship between economic growth and GHG emissions. The indices show improvements over the last 22 years. This is a span of 22 years here. Emissions have, in fact, not increased in Canada. They've actually decreased. If you look at the blue line in the middle here, they've decreased 25% per capita over this period. So, and this is due to technological improvements, more efficient practices and equipment, and also regulatory drivers as well. I'll have to move at a bit of a quicker pace here. Let's drill down to the provincial level now. Looking at the highest emitting provinces here would be Alberta and Ontario. But keep in mind, there's great variability of industry type over the provinces, and each province has its own power generation mix. So, for example, Alberta is 85% fueled by fossil fuel, natural gas. And whereas BC and Ontario have clean electricity in abundance with over 90% from non-emitting sources. So the electricity demand, industrial and transportation are the two largest end-use segments. And this graph is highly generalized, but because each province has emissions from every source. But you can see that Alberta and Saskatchewan, the industrial demand for electricity is prominent, whereas in BC and Ontario, the demand for electricity is more in the transportation sector. It figures more prominently. So this is very relevant, the intensity reductions of electricity. Canada has one of the cleanest grids in the world. However, one can clearly see that Alberta and Saskatchewan on this graph here have the farthest way to go in terms of getting to a net zero grid emission by 2035. And this is come out recently with the Clean Electricity Regulation to achieve a net zero electrical grid by 2035. So Alberta and Saskatchewan, as I said, have the longest way to go. And notice that we can't get to zero. This is this concept of hard to abate emissions. It will be impossible to wipe out all emissions from various niche segments in industry. So Alberta, the projection is that we will go down to 115 carbon dioxide emissions per gigawatt hour by 2035. So that's where CCUS comes in to get us to net zero, is we can put away that carbon and achieve net zero goals. So we'll move on to carbon capture. I gave you some background statistics up until now to highlight the rationale and the drivers behind CCUS. And the next sections will give you an understanding of what each part of the CCUS value chain entails. I will cover carbon capture and then give an overview of carbon utilization. But we have Jason Cardiff presenting, who has grown a company from CO2 utilization opportunities. And then Hamid, my colleague, will tell us about underground storage of CO2. So this picture is a coal-fired power plant in southeast Saskatchewan. It has a carbon capture and storage project, the Aquastore project, associated with it. The CO2 is stored over 3 kilometers deep, and Hamid will speak on this a little more in detail. But this is a very good example of a successful capture project in Canada. So the types of point source capture would be pre, post, and oxy-fuel combustion. So we'll just go over this very quickly, but the pre-combustion is the fossil fuel is combusted, and then the resulting CO2 emissions are captured after that. The post-combust, that was the post-combustion, if I wasn't clear about that. Pre-combustion is capturing the CO2 prior to combustion, just as the name suggests, and it involves water gas shift process and synfuel. I don't particularly understand it as I'm not an engineer, but this is another type of point source capture. Post-combustion is by far the most common one. The oxy-fuel combustion is combustion in the absence of air and just in the presence of oxygen. This is very new. It's not very common, although in the beginning of 2024, China has one of the first commercial operations within a cement plant to capture CO2 with an oxy-fuel combustion setup. So direct air capture, the prior slide was about point source capture. This was a point source capture out of a flue stack. The other area would be direct air capture. And so this is capturing CO2 directly from the atmosphere. You don't have to be near an industrial emitter. And they use a chemical that can trap CO2. The DAC system, direct air capture systems, they can be situated anywhere, as I said. And also, these are early stage, but increasing number of projects have been announced in this. Carbon Engineering, a Canadian company out of BC, was just purchased by Occidental Petroleum for over $1 billion US in 2023, and they're currently building the world's largest DAC plant in Texas, and they will store that CO2 deep underground. So the concept of carbon dioxide removal is important to talk about. It's known as negative emissions because they're taking it out of the atmosphere. It's not CO2 that is being emitted as a result of industrial activities. It's taking out CO2 from out of the atmosphere, historic emissions included. So there are a variety of capture technologies that can be used. Some of them are incumbent, have been used for a long time. Others are emerging. But the most common here, like the two categories would be absorption and adsorption. So the former involves CO2 dissolution into a physical or a chemical solvent. And the latter, the adsorption, is typically with use of a membrane. Here's a picture of a membrane and the concept that the CO2 can make it through the membrane, but the gas does not. The other constituents of the gas does not make it through. So this is one way that CO2 can be captured. Adsorption membranes happen to be less toxic than the chemicals that are used in the absorption area. And also there are other techniques for carbon capture that aren't shown on here, such as cryogenic distillation at very low temperatures, and also pressure or temperature adsorption swing. So there are a variety of methods, and of course, many of them are under development and being tested. Okay, so moving on here. I'm going to skip over this. This is the incumbent, the most common way to capture CO2. It's an amine based, a chemical based, in the tower, in the absorber tower. The problem with this is the process uses an awful lot of energy. And we've already looked at the fact that electrical emissions, electricity generation emissions are one of the highest that we have to decarbonize and reduce. So this is a problem with the incumbent method of capturing carbon. Carbon dioxide removals I already touched upon. But this is out of the World Resources Institute. This is a handy little graph for a variety of methods by which carbon dioxide can be removed from the atmosphere. Here is the direct air capture that we already talked about, probably the most commercial of all of these options. So there are a wide range of developments, anywhere from trees, planting of trees, but trees with enhanced photosynthesis capacity so they can grow faster and absorb more CO2. There's also techniques like agricultural residues, like think of crop left in the field, changing those into a carbon-rich solution that can be injected into soils, which is already a major carbon sink. Also ground up magnesium-rich rocks that can be applied to croplands. It will sequester CO2, and even putting that into the ocean. And also some ones I haven't heard of before, like farming seaweed, and also that can sequester a lot of CO2 and sinking it to the deep ocean. So something I just learned about. And then here's the carbon markets. So if you're putting away carbon dioxide, you can actually, not only is it good for the environment and for decarbonization goals, but you can also generate a carbon credit that you can sell. So CO2 actually becomes a bit of a commodity that way and a revenue generator. Okay, so the utilization, soon I'm going to pass this over to Jason, but I am going to give a high-level overview of what this is. And we can hear from Jason about his specific example. So Natural Resources Canada, I got this graphic out of, and it's a little much to see, but what I did want you to notice is that there are the top half of the circle is carbon dioxide conversion into other products, and the bottom half of the circle is direct use. So there's a distinction there. Pardon me. So we'll go through a few examples of that just so that you understand the differences. For CO2 direct use, the most common use of CO2 would be in enhanced oil recovery. And this is something we do a lot of in Western Canada, in Alberta, since the 1950s. And what it is the injection of CO2 into a reservoir, an oil and gas reservoir, to push out essentially and sweep the reservoir to be able to produce more oil and gas. So it's also referred to as a tertiary recovery method. It's reserves that would otherwise have been left in the reservoir that are unrecoverable. So the enhanced oil recovery enables that. And it is a way to store CO2, but in some cases, the CO2 is intentionally produced and recycled in a loop. So another example of CO2 use, and there already are established markets for this, is fertilizer production, methanol fuels, chemical precursors, food and beverage, healthcare, and other materials, which represent smaller markets. So CO2 is used in a variety of ways. It's used to decaffeinate coffee. It's used to quick freeze food, think dry ice here, sterilization agent, and a gas used for carbonating beverages. And in agriculture, it can enrich the air in greenhouses, and it optimizes photosynthesis. And demand for CO2, there, as I said, there is a CO2 market. It's expected to grow by more than 7% a year. So my last slide before Jason, this is an example of conversion. So we looked at direct use up till now. This is conversion. So you can make useful synthetic fuels, chemicals, and other products through utilization. And some of the emerging uses for this are listed at right there, like a synthetic fuel, e-methanol. So this is fuels that are not sourced from fossil fuels, rather it's from captured CO2. And in the case of methanol, it's the captured CO2 plus green hydrogen. So you need to electrolyze water to separate hydrogen from oxygen, and you need to do that powered with renewable energy. So when you line all that up, you get something called e-methanol. And then there's also sustainable aviation fuel, which has a much lower carbon footprint than conventional aviation fuels. Again, that is a non-petroleum fuel. It's made from bioproducts like wood residues, agricultural residues, municipal solid waste, forestry waste wood, even cooking oil and animal fat can go into a sustainable aviation fuel. So there are other things here, building materials such as aggregate, concrete, and consumer products. And I hope to learn a little bit more of this from Jason. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll hand it back to the moderator.
Thanks, Michelle. That was some great insight and overview into capture and utilization. And now I'll ask Jason to share his screen and tell us a little bit more about his work with Clean O2.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and tell a little bit of a story. And thanks for the great summary, Michelle. That was wonderful. Very, very informative. Just a little bit of background, as mentioned, I did start off on this pathway as a plumber and gas fitter. I started working for a company here in Calgary called XL Air in 2005, and shortly thereafter recognized that there was an opportunity to develop technologies that could reduce greenhouse gas emissions from all of these natural gas-fired heating appliances. So, when you look at 2005 as kind of a start point for Clean O2, it'll be 20 years next year. So we've been at this for a very, very long period of time, and it's been quite the journey. And I've met a lot of really remarkable people along the way, and I'm hoping that from all of this, we were able to have a positive impact in reducing emissions. So again, the focus of Clean O2 is to not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions from natural gas-fired heating appliances, but also do something useful with it. We want to be able to embody the circular economy as well as greenhouse gas emission reduction. So we do that through a very sort of unusual way. I would say that Clean O2 is definitely an outlier in terms of CCUS because of the scale and the type of appliances that we typically attach to. Technical problem. Hang on here. There we go. So one of the things that we always like talking about to start our discussion is the narrative around greenhouse gas emission reductions. I think it's really important that we focus on the means of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And usually when I go to these types of conferences and discussions, there's a lot of heavy bias towards electrification as a means of achieving that end goal of meeting net zero initiatives. And having spent over 2 decades in this industry, at the state that the technology is at now, it's very challenging for us to achieve 100% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions through electrification efforts. So while I support, things like heat pump technologies and further advancements in electrification, I think we need to take a more wholesome approach to the act of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by saying that natural gas is going to maintain its position as a primary energy source for many decades to come. And if we're going to acknowledge that, then we need to start investing and supporting technologies that help reduce greenhouse gas emissions while still maintaining our current energy infrastructure. That's really our focus, to say, look, yes to heat pumps, yes to PV, yes to CCUS, yes to everything. We can't just pick one lane and just run with it, because then we'll ultimately fall short. So that I'll step off of my soapbox and move into some examples of where we have installed our systems. We're happy to report we're just in the process of closing a $5 million joint venture deal with New Jersey Gas. I'm very proud to say that we're exporting this Canadian innovation, this homegrown Alberta-based innovation around the world. I'll give you some other examples here, but New Jersey Gas has said, we need to be able to embrace methods of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from these very small aggregated sources of GHGs, like boilers, hot water tanks, furnaces, and other types of appliances. So these two systems that you see here, this is the first paired system where we put them in parallel at their headquarters just outside of Trenton, New Jersey. And from there, it'll be a launch point to deploy tens of thousands of units within the state in the coming years. I think the project that we have launches over 5 to 10 years. So we're going to see a definite uptick in terms of deployment of Carbon X units, which are these systems you see here, built here in Calgary. The next unit you see here, this is kind of interesting. We installed this at the Radisson Blu at the Mall of America. This one went in about 4 years ago. It's a wonderful group of people to work with. They've won multiple awards. Most recently, they won an International Sustainability Award for the technology that they had put in there. So what's particularly interesting about this installation is it not only focuses again on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So every time the commercial hot water tanks turn on, they're emitting flue gas. The flue gas is rich with carbon dioxide. We pull that carbon dioxide, we turn it into a commodity. Then that commodity can then be turned into a product that the hotel can use. And that could be general purpose cleaners, laundry detergents, those tiny little bars of soap that everybody gets when they go into their hotel room. So this is a really compelling story for not only reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also supporting the circularity in what we do with the emissions and making it tangible. I think that's something else that I think we need to do more of in the energy space, creating tangible narratives so that everybody can partake in these discussions. It's not just a bunch of energy nerds sitting around a table talking about how we can have a positive impact on reducing emissions. Let's include everybody. Let's find tools that allow all of us to contribute to the story. I don't know how many people on this call have ever had the great opportunity of working with Japanese organizations, but we've spent 4 or 5 years developing a wonderful partnership with Tokyo Gas and a company called Okaya & Co., which is a 380-year-old trading company based in Japan. I just got back from a tech conference in Nagoya a couple weeks ago, and they're wonderful to work with, and are also looking at deploying thousands of these Carbon X units to meet the country's guidelines of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And as the graph showed in Michelle's presentation, obviously on a global scale, Japan produces about the same amount of GHGs as Canada. It's very small, but yet we still need to be able to support initiatives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, regardless of how much you produce. We all can play a part in helping to do better. This one's really cool. Another great one is a high school that we did just outside of Chicago. What better way to engage kids and students than to have something in the CCUS space at their facility, at their school? So now not only can they talk about this during science class, but you can point them towards direct examples of real world tangible solutions that will inspire them, will create new innovators to help them think of other wonderful ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on a global scale. It doesn't have to be, you know, big think tank and large engineering firms that could come up with these great solutions. It's everybody. Everybody can play a part. And we believe in supporting schools, universities, and other nonprofit organizations, because really innovation can come from anywhere. Another favorite story of mine, the Calgary Co-op is a wonderful supporter of our technology. We installed this system at their headquarters here in Calgary about 2 years ago. And as a result of this, again, supporting the circular economy, they have their own branded products. So you can go to a Calgary Co-op today. You can go into their pharmacy where they have all of the soaps and detergents. So you can buy a Calgary branded product made with recycled carbon from their facility. So again, another real world example, a tangible example of how we can engage our communities to have discussions around what is CCUS. Let's talk a little bit about how our system works, because I'm sure a lot of you are wondering how we do that. So let's start with a boiler. Now, this could be a hot water tank. This could be something used for space heating. This could be anything that uses natural gas, but at a very, very small scale. So we're not the industrial scale. We're not the cat finning of CCUS. We're more of the, you know, the Fords of CCUS. We're small. We're micro scale. So imagine a boiler, a furnace, a hot water tank in your mechanic room. We're going to run it with a minimum of 240,000 BTUs. So this is, again, something you would typically find in a hotel, a high school, recreation center. You're then going to vent this appliance to atmosphere. You're going to run some cold process water to the appliance. You're going to turn that boiler on. You're going to heat that water up to create some hot process water for the building, right? And from that, you're going to create carbon dioxide and waste heat. And a great day to look at that is go outside today, look at the skyline of wherever you're located, and look at all that steam that's coming off the top of those buildings. That's waste heat that somebody's paid for, excuse me, combined with carbon dioxide. So what we do is we place a Carbon X unit in the mechanical room next to the appliances within 20 to 30 feet. We direct a portion of the flue gas into our appliance, where we run it across a bed of potassium hydroxide. Potassium hydroxide, when it is exposed to carbon dioxide, is mildly exothermic. So we take the waste heat from the appliance with the exothermic heat from the chemistry, and then we store it in a vessel inside the Carbon X unit, which of course means less waste heat, less carbon dioxide. We then take that waste heat and we apply it upstream of that boiler to act as an economizer. Now, economizers are nothing new. In the HVAC industry, we've been doing them for hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years. So this portion of the technology is very, very familiar. In fact, it's what allows us to be able to deploy these units all over the world, is because we've been installing economizers on heating appliances for so long, it's familiar. So when I go to the city of Calgary, or if I go to the city of Toronto, or any agency that needs to go and put in a system, it's listed as an economizer. So it's an easy discussion to have with the people that need to understand how to pull permits. Again, tangibility matters. If you go into a mechanical room to somebody who has no familiarity with carbon capture, say, hey, I'd love to install this piece of carbon capture equipment in an industry where there is no familiarity, you will have nothing but troubles and red tape. And I can tell you from experience, it is an absolute pain in the rear. But if you present it as something tangible that everybody can understand, it streamlines that conversation and allows you to install. I think we've got units in 3 different countries now. I think we're up to 40 or 50 units out in the field currently operating. It really, really helped us streamline this operation, helping to deploy these units. For anybody else that's in this space, remember to keep your story tangible. Make it relatable. Make it so that everybody understands what you're trying to do, and they don't need an engineering degree in order to understand what you're trying to accomplish. Now, here's where things get really interesting for us. That chemical that we put in there is now potassium carbonate. And if there's some moisture, we can sometimes produce potassium bicarbonate, depending on how much moisture is in the flue gas. By its nature, it is now worth more than the hydroxide that we put in. We don't have to call it green. We don't have to call it sustainable. Just by its nature, it is now worth more. Typical potassium carbonate production requires the combustion of natural gas to produce carbon dioxide that they will aerate through aqueous KOH or potassium hydroxide to produce K2CO3 or potassium carbonate. So there is an energy input needed to produce this chemical. Well, you've paid for the natural gas with this wonderful CO2 that you're producing. You're just dumping off in the atmosphere that we're trying to reduce. You don't care where it goes, or maybe you do, but either way, it's venting to atmosphere. So we can come in, we can take that same molecule and apply it to this chemistry to produce a higher value commodity that we can collect and then go and sell, and we can turn it into, gosh, we can turn it into soap, we can turn it into detergents, commercial cleaners, textiles, fertilizers. Now, I will pause here just quickly, just to let you know, historically, we have been known as the soap company, the carbon capture soap company. That was a mistake. We didn't mean to be known as the soap company or the carbon capture soap company. It was just an output of the fact that we created something tangible, and we really create some amazing products. If any of you have ever tried some of our personal care products, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I encourage you to go to your local Calgary Co-op or visit our shop and order some. It is really good products. I know that sounds like a plug, but I'm just bragging because I have become a soap snob inadvertently. It's not, I used to be an Irish Spring kind of guy, and now I don't use anything else but our own products. So, but it doesn't have to be soap. It can be fertilizer. We did a great project with Olds College and another agency up in Calgary to create this fertilizer that we tested on a golf course just outside of Calgary. Japan is using Tokyo Gas is using it in as a fertilizer for some of their tomato farms. So there's as mentioned in Michelle's presentation, there are multiple avenues, beneficial avenues, economic avenues that we can pursue to deploy the carbon that we're producing. Moving on, so the units that you saw in the previous pictures were all version 3.4, 3.5s. Next year, we're coming out with a version 4, which is designed to reduce more than 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions being produced from a given appliance. So the average is between 33 and 73. So just a little north of 50%, I think, is where we're going to be with this version 4. It streamlines our operations. It moves it from a batch feed process to a cartridge style system. So think of the delivery system to dropping off bags of salt for your water softener or those large water bottles to your building. So we're going to provide a very similar service to that. Moving on, here's some great examples of the gas utilities that we currently work with. They're our greatest ally. They have obviously been under a tremendous amount of pressure to decarbonize these smaller aggregated sources of GHGs. They're under a tremendous amount of pressure, and what better way to do it than with something that's already commercialized and ready to go. So we've had wonderful success with many gas utilities, both in Canada, the United States, and of course in Japan. These are some of the partnerships that we're currently working on. Okaya, quick story. I met the CEO of Okaya & Co. in Japan earlier this year, and he is the 13th generation CEO to that organization. And I always imagine, Mr. Okaya sitting around the table when he's like 12 years old, and he tells his father that he wants to be a fireman or an engineer or something, and his family says, nope, sorry, decision has been made. You are going to be the CEO of this company one day. End of story. So anyways, remarkable human being, wonderful. He went to school in New York. Great guy, wonderful guy. If you walk past him on the street, you wouldn't know that he was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar trading company. Independent voices matter tremendously. I'll skip ahead here really quick. We have lots of independent reviews of our technology to support that it does work and it does provide value. Here's some great examples of some of the products that we make. Again, we're not a soap company. We just make really good soap. Here's some of the agencies that we work currently with from the government agencies, again, to support the export of this technology to the world, as well as support here in Canada. And that's it. That's all. No more slides.
Thanks, Jason. That was, thanks for that. That was so interesting to hear how things have evolved for clean O2. We are getting towards the end of the hour, so I'll ask Hamid to share his screen and talk about storage.
Kaylin, would you mind please share your screen? Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule today. I guess with the interest of time, I try to rush through my slides fairly quickly, so to give you an idea of what the storage means. So if you can please go through the screen. So once we capture our CO2 and transport it to a storage site, we need to take care of it, and we need to inject it in some storage complex, which will stay there permanently. Next slide, please. So for the most favorable storage site is a saline aquifer. In terms of the definition, is a porous rock formation which can contain highly saline water. The water is not usable for human or agricultural use. Therefore, it can provide a vast space for CO2 storage and has a significant global potential for mitigating CO2 emission. We need to have a cap rock. The cap rock is basically a layer of impermeable which serve and ensure that long-term containment of CO2 is secure. There are other options like Michelle touched base on that in terms of enhanced oil recovery, where we capture CO2 and utilize it by injecting into the oil reservoir to increase oil recovery. And there are different mechanisms that get activated in enhanced oil recovery. There are dual benefit to that. It's reduced CO2 emission, atmospheric CO2, as well as its enhanced energy production. Next slide, please. In terms of different options, we have many different options for putting CO2, but if we're going to talk about larger scale, primarily the sedimentary basin would be taking care of a lot of CO2 emission. Sedimentary basins are natural formation, which can serve as an excellent reservoir for CO2 storage. In terms of mechanisms, CO2 get captured, get injected underneath the ground, and is supposed to be stay there through the impermeable cap rock. There are also soil and agriculture, which soil absorbs CO2, and the benefits it gets is improved soil fertility as well as enhanced crop yield. The frustration in terms of the sequestration by planting tree, the tree capture and get CO2 and from the atmosphere and turn it into biomass. By biomass, we mean trunk, branches, and leaves. There are other options like mine trailing, and what is mine trailing? Is basically the leftover from material from mining activity, which can chemically react with CO2. Certain mine tailings, which are rich in minerals like magnesium and calcium, will react with CO2 and make it a stable carbonate product. There are a lot of advantages towards that. It's a utilized industrial byproduct, also reduce CO2 atmosphere. The basaltic rocks also geochemically react with the CO2 and turns into a stable solid carbonate. In terms of the durability of those, it's also permanent CO2 storage option. And there are different projects like Carp Fix project in Iceland, which has been showcased the feasibility of using this type of formation for CO2 sequestration. Next slide, please. The map here highlights the CO2 storage potential in Western Canadian sedimentary basins. This showcases the saline aquifer has a significant storage capacity. As you see from the color-coded regions, it indicates that they're capable of storing CO2 is huge. Red zone represents the highest capacity, and sometimes it exceeds 25 million tons, which is huge. This aquifer provide definitely a promising solution for long-term CO2 sequestration. This support Canada climate change mitigation efforts through leveraging the Alberta great geology for CO2 sequestration. Next one, please. In terms of commercial CO2 project in Alberta, there are two main projects which are currently active. One of them is Alberta Carbon Truck Line, and the other one is Shell Quest with the ACTL. This is basically a pipeline system that captures CO2 from industrial sources to sequestration site. The main purpose of that is for enhanced oil recovery. Therefore, it demonstrates how CO2 can be utilized for both CO2 storage as well as for economic advantage of that. The Quest project, which is operated by Shell, is taking CO2 from Scotford complex and securely store it in the deep Ceylon aquifer. This also demonstrates the effectiveness of the larger scale CO2 capture and storage solution. These projects illustrate how Alberta is leading in this industry in terms of deploying CCUS technology to reduce emission and also meet the climate change. Next, please. So with the Quest project, they capture CO2, capturing 1 million ton of CO2 annually from 3 hydrogen manufacturing units at the Scotford upgrader. In terms of the storage side, the CO2 is then injected at the 2 kilometer underneath the ground in the basal Cambrian sandstone formation to ensure safe and long-term sequestration. In terms of the economic impact of that, recently has been 2,000 jobs were created during development and construction of the facility. To date, Quest has captured and stored over 9 million tons of CO2, which exceed their expectation in terms of the reliability of the project, cost efficiency, and its performance. In terms of the global significance of this project, this highlights the feasibility of larger-scale CCS solution, which is paving the way for different similar initiative worldwide. Next, please. The Quest CCS site is the capture CO2 is then transformed through a 65-kilometer pipeline in the dense phase to utilize the pipeline capacity. The pipeline has been constructed from October 2013 to 2014. The pipeline route were then adjusted over 30 times in order to address the landowner concern, as well as it also shows the commitment of the operators in collaborating and minimizing the impact on the environment. The infrastructure ensure that safe and reliable CO2 transport from the capture site to the storage site. Next, please. In terms of the high quality of the geological formation, the CCS leverage the great geology. The site injected the basal Cambrian sand is the 2-kilometer deep formation. It's definitely high quality sandstone reservoir with 17% porosity. There are a lot of storage space for CO2 injection. It has excellent permeability when it comes to the injectivity, with permeability around 1 Darcy. The formation is very efficient for CO2 injection, and also serves multiple seals with 200-meter thick continuous caprock that prevents CO2 migration to the different other layers. This is a very well characterized geological setting, which ensures safe and long-term CO2 storage. Also demonstrate the effectiveness of subsurface carbon sequestration. Next, please. The other commercial one is the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line. It's a 150-kilometer pipeline that has a distribution capacity of 14 million tons of CO2 per year. The pipeline currently is used by Enhanced Energy for enhanced oil recovery, and CO2 is permanently stored underground. In terms of the significance of this project, is an integrated approach for reducing emission while supporting energy production and long-term carbon sequestration. Next, please. This slide highlights 2 significant CO2 storage projects in Saskatchewan, as one of them is Weber-Midale Enhanced Oil Recovery, and the other one is the Boundary Dam Questor. Weber-Midale is a CO2 enhanced oil recovery project, and Boundary Dam is a purely CO2 sequestration, which is operated by PTRC at the Questor site. Next, please. The Questor CCS project near the Boundary Dam power plant in Saskatchewan is a pioneering CO2 storage initiative. This project has successfully captured and safely stored 600 kilotons of CO2 in a deep saline aquifer. It's a little bit different with respect to Shell Quest, is injecting at a deeper depth, 3 kilometer deep. There have been many different technology. One of them seismic monitoring, which use surface 3D seismic data in order to track the CO2 movement within the subsurface and ensure safe and effective storage. There are other different innovative technology which use advanced geophysical technologies to monitor and validate CO2 storage performance over time. Aquistors, similar to Quest, also demonstrate the feasibility of deep saline aquifers for long-term carbon sequestration, and also set a benchmark for CCS project globally. Next, please. And this slides outline the growing landscape of CO2 storage project in Alberta. As the active projects are Quest and Aquistor proposed projects, also been highlighted. There are numerous proposed carbon hub projects which spread across Alberta. In terms of the regional coverage, span all across Alberta, reflecting a strategic effort for reducing emission and support sustainable industrial growth. In terms of the significance of this initiative, Alberta shows Alberta commitment to achieving net zero emission through innovation and larger scale CCS deployment. This expansion of the CCS hub will position Alberta as a global leader in carbon management technologies. And next one, please. And in terms of the conclusion, so reducing net zero will be virtually impossible without CCS technology. There are many different options, including as presented by other presenters. CCUS implemented at the larger scale is necessary to meet GHG emission reduction in Canada and globally. There are definitely some policies, incentives which promote industrial uptake of CCS. Regulatory bodies are always helping to accelerate this uptake. Along all of these technology development, we need to have a public confidence, so we make sure these projects are done safely and economically. And Canada is definitely leveraging great geology, and therefore is very well positioned in terms of research innovation for CCUS and new energy like hydrogen, also very connected to the CCS CO2 strategy. Therefore, we need to consider not only emission but also development of technology for hydrogen industry as well. And with that, I guess a little bit over time, but I take it back to Tamra.
Thank you, Hamid. That was a great peek into storage within Western Canada. So we hope that that our participants have enjoyed the session today. If I don't think we have any questions in the Q&A or in the chat, but thank you so much for your participation today. I'll ask Kaylin just to share our final questions for the survey. If you could just take a moment to answer them, that would be greatly appreciated. So we'd like to know how well you enjoyed the webinar content today, if it helped to address some of your questions, some of the things you were wondering about CCUS. And we'll give everyone just a moment to answer this question. And the next question, how valuable was the information presented in the webinar? And we have a scale there for you to select an answer. And our next question, would you consider a career transition into the industry based on what you've heard today? Did we inspire you to consider contributing to GHG emissions reduction through an industry like CCUS? And lastly, would you like to learn more about the CCUS industry in Alberta? And once you have finished those questions, please click submit at the bottom of the text box. And we thank everyone for participating in our survey today. And I'd like to thank Michelle, Jason, and Hamid for presenting to us today. You provided some very valuable information, and very much appreciate you spending the morning with us. It looks like that's all we have from our participants today. So I just want to remind you that this is the first webinar in a series we will be presenting on carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Join us again on Thursday at 11 a.m. for our next webinar. And that one will be on the CCUS workforce needed to support a world-leading sector in Alberta. And you can sign up for this webinar, visit our social media channels for Carbon Management Canada, or visit albertacarbonhub.com. That's the Alberta Carbon Hub, albertacarbonhub.com to sign up for our next webinars in our series. Well, thank you, everyone. We very much appreciate your participation today. If you have any questions left after today's webinar, feel free to reach out to us, and we hope to see you at another event again soon.
Sorry, we did get a question. Sorry. Can we
Yes.
get a presentation? So we should probably highlight on that, Tamara, if you'd like to.
Yes. Yeah, so we actually will make the full presentation. We've recorded the session today. We'll make it available on the Alberta Carbon Hub website. So that's albertacarbonhub.com. We'll make the presentation available there, and we can also send a link out to participants today so that you'll have access to it after today's session. Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate your participation and hope to see you back for the next webinar. Thanks to our speakers. Everyone have a great day.